The Galactic Empire patrol descended on the remote outpost with the arrogance of conquerors. Their armor gleamed under the harsh lights of their dropships, a testament to their technological superiority. They moved in precise formations, their weapons trained on every shadow. The human outpost had been silent for weeks. The conflict it once hosted reduced to smoldering ruins. Amid the debris they found him. A lone soldier sat against a crumbled wall, his uniform torn and stained with blood. Sergeant Ethan Kane looked up, his face calm despite his apparent injuries. His hands were bound, and his weapons were nowhere to be seen. For all appearances, he was a defeated man, waiting for the inevitable. The alien commander stepped forward, his voice dripping with disdain. A single human? This is what Earth sends to defend its borders. The soldiers behind him chuckled, their sharp, inhuman features twisting into smug grins. Ethan remained silent, his gaze steady. The commander signaled for the guards to restrain him, though there was little need. Ethan offered no resistance as they hauled him to his feet. His calm demeanor unnerved some of the younger recruits, but their training held firm. To them, humans were an inferior species, a primitive race barely worthy of notice in the grand scheme of the galaxy. Secure him for transport, the commander barked, turning away. We'll see if this one knows anything useful. As they marched him toward the waiting dropship, Ethan's mind raced. He felt the familiar pull of the moon, faint but insistent. It was close enough to stir something deep within him. He clenched his fists, feeling the faint tingling sensation of his body beginning to respond. Not yet, he thought, suppressing the change with practiced discipline. Timing was everything. The soldiers didn't notice the subtle signs. The way his breathing slowed to a measured rhythm. The way his wounds began to close beneath his tattered uniform. They were too busy congratulating themselves, their voices echoing with derision. Earth really is a backwater, one soldier sneered. Their best soldier couldn't even put up a fight. Ethan let the words wash over him, his expression betraying nothing. Inside, however, a storm brewed. The Empire's arrogance was their greatest weakness, and he intended to exploit it. The dropship lifted off, carrying Ethan toward the Imperial flagship that loomed above the planet. The vessel was a marvel of engineering, its sleek design a stark contrast to the destruction it left in its wake. As they entered the docking bay, Ethan caught a glimpse of the moon through the viewport. It hung in the blackness, a beacon that stirred something primal within him. The guards prodded him forward, their weapons raised. They didn't notice the faint glint in his eyes or the way his muscles tensed ever so slightly. Ethan allowed himself a small, knowing smile. The Empire had captured a human soldier, but they had no idea what they were truly dealing with. The interrogation room was sterile, its walls a smooth, featureless gray that absorbed sound and light. Ethan sat in the center, shackled to a chair made of reinforced alloy. The Empire had spared no expense in containing what they believed to be a mere human. Overhead, a dim light cast shadows across his face, highlighting the calm, almost amused expression he wore. Across from him stood Commander Alvik, a towering figure with a long, ridged face and cold, yellow eyes. Alvik leaned in, his voice sharp and mocking. "Do you understand where you are, human? You're aboard the flagship of the Galactic Empire. Your kind should feel honored even to be here, though you'll find it's the last place you'll ever see." Ethan tilted his head, his lips twitching into a faint smirk. He didn't reply, and the silence stretched uncomfortably. The commander's patience thinned. "Your outpost fell without resistance. Your planet is next. Tell me, what defenses does Earth have left? Spare yourself unnecessary suffering and cooperate." Still, Ethan remained silent. His gaze was steady, unyielding. The faint hum of the ship's systems filled the void between them. Frustration flickered across Alvik's face. He gestured to one of his officers, who stepped forward and activated a console. A holographic display lit up, showing images of Earth cities, its military installations, and its people. Alvik's voice took on a smug tone. "This fragile world of yours, so naive, so primitive. Do you think your kind can stand against us? We could wipe you out in days." Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm and even. "You're so certain, aren't you?" Alvic's eyes narrowed. "Certain of what?" "That you understand us." Ethan leaned back slightly, his chains clinking against the chair. "That you've seen everything humanity has to offer." The commander scoffed. "We've studied your species. You're resourceful, I'll grant you that, but ultimately you're weak. Your technology is outdated, your biology unremarkable. What could you possibly have to challenge the might of the Empire?" Ethan's smile widened, and for the first time, something darker flickered in his expression. "You'd be surprised." Alvic bristled, motioning for the guards to keep their weapons trained on him. "Enough games. You'll tell us what we need to know, or we'll extract it by force." As the guards stepped closer, Ethan felt it again. The pull of the moon, stronger now, seeping into his very being. His heartbeat, though still calm, echoed like thunder in the quiet room. The subtle shift in his body began, too faint for the untrained eye but impossible for Ethan to ignore. One of the guards hesitated, glancing at Ethan's hands. "Commander." "His wounds, they're gone." Alvic turned sharply, his gaze narrowing. "What are you talking about?" The guard pointed, and Alvic's eyes followed. Where deep cuts had once marred Ethan's wrists, the skin was now smooth, unbroken. The faintest hint of unease crept into the room. Ethan met Alvic's gaze and spoke, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "You've made one critical mistake." Alvic sneered, though his confidence wavered. "And what's that?" Ethan's smile turned feral. "You think the chains are for me?" Before Alvic could respond, a sliver of moonlight broke through a narrow viewport, illuminating Ethan. His breathing deepened, his muscles rippling under the restraints. A low growl reverberated from his chest, primal and menacing. The guards took a step back, their weapons trembling. Alvic shouted orders, but his voice faltered as he realized too late that they were no longer the predators in the room. The flagship trembled as alarms blared across the corridors. Ethan moved through the chaos with lethal precision, his senses attuned to every sound, every scent. The reinforcements that had rushed to contain him were already scattered, their bodies strewn across the metallic floors. Each encounter ended the same. Blaster fire that never hit its mark and screams cut short by claws and fangs. Ethan's heightened instincts guided him deeper into the ship. He wasn't merely rampaging. He had a purpose. His sharp eyes scanned the labyrinthine halls, noting the structural layout, the placement of critical systems. His mind, though clouded by the primal instincts of the wolf, remained focused on a singular goal: escape. The Empire's soldiers were relentless, but their fear betrayed them. Ethan could smell it in the air, a bitter tang that fueled his predatory drive. Another squad appeared around a corner, their heavy footsteps echoing ahead of them. He dropped low, muscles coiling like springs. As they came into view, he lunged with a speed they couldn't anticipate. The first soldier fell instantly, his weapon clattering to the ground. The others barely had time to react before Ethan was among them, a whirlwind of claws and fury. One tried to radio for backup, but his cry was silenced as Ethan's hand closed around his throat. The fight ended as quickly as it had begun, the corridor falling silent once more. Pausing, Ethan caught sight of a security terminal. His claws clacked against the console as he activated it, pulling up schematics of the ship. His sharp eyes scanned the holographic display, locking onto the location of the escape pods. A growl of satisfaction rumbled from his chest. Behind him, the ship's internal defenses activated. Automated turrets emerged from the walls, swiveling toward him with mechanical precision. Ethan dodged the first volley of plasma bolts, his movements a blur. He leaped to the ceiling, claws digging into the metal for grip, and launched himself at the nearest turret. It exploded in a shower of sparks as he ripped it apart, the pieces raining down around him. The other turrets adjusted, but he was already moving. His agility defied logic as he darted between bolts of energy, each movement calculated to evade the incoming fire. Within moments, the defenses lay in ruins, their remains smoking on the floor. Ethan continued his advance, the distant hum of the ship's power core growing louder. He was close now, his path littered with the remnants of those who had tried to stop him. The air grew hotter, tinged with the metallic tang of overheated systems. He reached a maintenance hatch and tore it open, stepping into the chamber housing the core. The sight of the massive reactor filled his vision, its pulsing light casting an eerie glow. Ethan moved quickly, his claws tearing through control panels and conduits. Sparks flew as the core began to destabilize, its hum growing into a deep, resonant thrum. Satisfied, he turned and sprinted toward the escape pods. Behind him, the flagship groaned, its systems failing one by one. Ethan could hear the panicked voices of the crew over the intercom, their once confident tone replaced by desperation. The Empire had underestimated him, and now they were paying the price. The pods came into view, their sleek forms lined up in the launch bay. Ethan moved toward the nearest one, pausing only to glance back at the chaos he had unleashed. His glowing eyes narrowed as he stepped inside, the hatch sealing behind him. With a final press of a button, the pod launched into the void, leaving the doomed flagship to its fate. The escape pod hurtled through the void, its engines burning bright as it distanced itself from the crippled flagship. Inside, Ethan crouched, his breathing steady but heavy, his body still thrumming with the adrenaline of the fight. The transformation had receded, leaving behind the remnants of the wolf, claws partially retracted, amber still flickering in his eyes. He wiped blood from his face, unsure whether it was his or his enemy's. Through the small viewport, he could see the massive flagship. Fires raged across its hull, spilling plumes of smoke and debris into space. The power core, now unstable, pulsed with an ominous light that grew brighter with each second. The Empire's pride and terror, their flagship, was on the verge of total destruction. Inside the ship, chaos reigned. Crew members scrambled to reach escape pods, their voices overlapping in frantic pleas. The remaining soldiers fought to stabilize the core, but the damage Ethan had inflicted was irreparable. The corridors were choked with smoke and sparking wires, and the alarms had devolved into a continuous, ear-splitting drone. Commander Alvik stood on the bridge, his usually composed demeanor shattered. His hands gripped the edge of a console, his yellow eyes fixed on the readouts displaying the escalating failure of the ship's systems. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice cracking. It was just one human. The officer beside him shook his head, fear etched into every line of his face. "Not a human, Commander. Something else entirely. We were never prepared for this." Outside, Ethan's escape pod moved further away, the distance between him and the flagship growing rapidly. The pod's interior hummed softly, the only sound accompanying him now. He adjusted the controls, setting his course toward a nearby debris field where he could lose any pursuit. His thoughts drifted as he guided the pod. He thought of Earth, of the arrogance the Empire had displayed toward his people. They'd thought humanity was weak, just another species to be conquered and absorbed into their galactic order. They hadn't considered humanity's resilience, its ability to adapt, to survive. They hadn't known about him. As the flagship reached critical failure, the core's light intensified, a blinding white radiance that consumed the massive ship from within. The explosion followed seconds later, a silent, fiery bloom in the vacuum of space. The shockwave rippled outward, scattering debris and sending smaller ships in the fleet into disarray. Ethan watched from the safety of his pod, his expression unreadable. He activated the pod's communication system, tapping into a secure channel. His voice was calm but carried a weight that seemed to echo through the static. "This is Sergeant Ethan Kane, transmitting to any remaining human forces. The Empire isn't invincible. They bleed just like we do, and they're afraid. I made sure of that." There was no immediate reply, but he didn't need one. Humanity would hear his message and they would prepare. The Empire's mistake wasn't just underestimating him. It was underestimating all of them. As the pod's engines powered down and it drifted into the cover of the debris field, Ethan leaned back, his gaze turning to the distant glow of a moon. His hand tightened into a fist, his claws retracting completely, though the wolf inside him remained. The Empire thought they had captured a mere soldier. What they'd captured was a warning.